Hello, Zero. This is Echo 42 Bravo. Radio check, over. Echo 42 Bravo. This is Zero. Loud and clear. Out.
Hello, shipmates. Welcome to episode 2 of the Cold War stories. Apologies for the delay. I was trying to get this out before Christmas 2025, but I ordered these new microphones. But they won't speak to my computer. They won't speak to my bloody phone. So I got my GoPro out. That won't speak to my computer. I miss the days when you got a camera, stuck a cable up its arse, stuck the cable in the computer, and the only place the audio and video could go was down the cable. So episode 2 of the Cold War stories is the Royal Navy. Navy salutes like that, British Army like that. We're going to the submarine service, or bobble blowers if you were a skimmer. For people who never served in the grey funnel line, a bobble blower was a submariner, and a skimmer, or a sea skimmer, is somebody who spends his time above the water rather than below. My father was a stoker in S-type submarines. I always imagined him shoveling coal into a boiler like in the old black and white movies. It didn't even occur to me as a child what would happen when the submarine went below the surface. Run out of oxygen, I guess. It was only when I was older that he told me that he looked after the engines, and that submarines didn't have boilers, just in case you thought they did. This here is my father's Kissing Kippers badge, the British Dolphin badge. And this is his International Submarines Association British section. I wear them with pride. This is my father's reefer jacket. Anything that goes on the right lapel is the wearer's parents, fathers or mother. Anything on the left lapel is where you put your medals. As you can see, there's none. If they gave medals away for blanket pressing, then I would have a whole rack of them. All I've got here is my Royal Engineers badge and the Veterans badge. A Pongo badge. Pongo, as my father used to say. I was a soldier. My father used to tell me that where the army goes, the pong goes. A bit rich coming from a 1950s submariner, but still, it wasn't as bad as what we used to call them. He used to regale us at the Sunday dinner table of his tales of lore of his service in the S-class submarines. And I have today three stories of a steward in the Royal Navy back in the 1950s. My father has since passed to that great shore run up in the sky, where I'm sure he is sitting there with his shipmates, drinking the perfect pint and laughing at his Pongo son trying to speak Jack speak. Apologies to all the Royal Navy sailors out there. On these pictures, you will see a little diamond on the right-hand side. That means it's been through an AI. So most of these are my father's photographs that I've just put through AI to improve the photo and put a bit of colour back into them. But a couple of them, like sitting down at the dinner table, are complete AI. The steward was from Devon, and his nickname was Buckwheat Harris. His full name was Donald John Nathaniel Harris. After basic training, Buckwheat took a long, slow trip down to Australia, and stopping off in Singapore pissed off the Australian Olympic water polo team when he persuaded his shipmates to, on their way to the swimming pool, pop off for a few beers and a couple of spring rolls. That in itself didn't upset the Olympic team. What upset them came when they went into the swimming pool. One of them took in too much water and threw up the 3 spring rolls into the swimming pool. And they floated around like mines, or more ominously, turds, swimming around in the pool. They were thrown out of the pool, and the Olympic team couldn't practice in that turd-ridden water until they'd sanitized it. That's what pissed them off. On arrival in Oz, he was posted to the fleet's mess as captain of submarines' steward. As Captain SM's steward, one of Harris's duties was to babysit. One evening, Harris was left babysitting for the captain with one child in a cot and one in a bed and a very nice, unlocked cocktail cabinet. On return from his night out with his wife, the Captain SM found one child crying in bed and one child crawling around on the floor, and Harris, pissed as a newt, asleep in the cot. But that wasn't the worst of it. He had also taught the kids the lobster song. What? What's the lobster song? Let me play you a bit.
I pull up to the wharf, a fisherman from the sea said, have ye a lobster you will sell to me, singing ro-diddly-o, 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 diddly.
What the fuck was that? Ah, civilian version. Ah, no. Let me play you the Matlow version. Sorry for that. No, he taught them this version. He told the children to sing it to their parents when they got home and after he had departed. He was never asked to babysit again. He also had a swift transfer from Captain Submarines' steward to steward on the HMS Telemachus. This was one of the larger T-class submarines. They were bigger boats built to serve further afield than the S-class, which were small coastal boats. And as such, they had more crew. More crew meant more officers, so they got a steward allocated to their mess. Buckwheat was a surly sea dog who didn't suffer fools quietly and didn't too care much for officers. Strange personality traits for an officer's mess steward, one would say. I asked my father why he wasn't sacked or posted out. It was bragging rights in the fleet bar. Buckwheat was so infamous that all the boat's officers wanted him. They put up with his capers so they could suffer being the centre of attention at fleet events with their tales of suffering and endurance at the hands of Harris. So, on with my father's first story. Story 1. The officers were taking too long to finish their meals, according to Harris, and Buckwheat wanted to get ashore for whatever reason. They were still on their main course and were chatting and enjoying intelligent discourse over their roast beef and Yorkshire puddings. Buckwheat's patience ran out, and he stormed into the mess, stood at the end of the table, and shouted, interrupting all the conversations, "Hands up who wants pudding!" A few nervous hands went up, like school kids at a kindergarten, and Buckwheat went to them, grabbed their unfinished plates, went back into the galley, came back out with pudding, dropped it in front of them, and said, "Right, that's dinner finished, I'm off." And he left the officers wide-eyed and eventually laughing. Another story for the fleet bar. Story 2. Background information. The Royal Navy has its own language, Jack speak, and it dates back to before Lord Nelson was a cabin boy. One such word is kai, or Pusser's kai. Kai is cocoa. Up in the Arctic Circle, where the Pongos have never been, lie the bodies of many a Matlow and many a Royal Marine. Cold, cold as charity. Cold, by Christ, that's chilly, but not as cold as Willie. He's dead, poor bugger, he's dead. It was the cold that got him. His oppo had forgot him and didn't bring him any midnight kai. The morning watchman found him, his frozen coat around him, and took him to the sick bay, there to die. Cold, cold as the hairs on a polar bear's chuff. Cold as custard on Pusser's duff. Cold, by Christ, that's chilly, but not as cold as Willie. He's dead, poor bugger, he's dead. Polar bear's chuff. Pusser's stuff. Oh dear. The officer of the watch was above the conning tower on the open-air bridge, Fairwater Bridge. This being a World War II class submarine. The boat was running on diesels as it was on the surface. A good place for the boat to be when the officer of the watch is outside, or not, depending on your view of the officer of the watch. When a World War II boat ran on diesels, some of the air come in through the access trunk through the conning tower, past the ladder. Most of it coming through inlet valves on the back of the conning tower, but some of it still came in. This was a nice, pleasant rush of air on a hot climb, but in a cold, wet North Atlantic, it was misery itself. And trying to climb up through the access tower with waterproofs on, carrying a hot cup of kai, was an achievement in itself. My father told me that climbing up the access tower with the air coming in was like fighting against a strong wind, and he served in them, and so I guess he knew. Buckwheat arrived on the bridge and tapped the officer of the watch on the shoulders, and when he turned round, he presented him with a nice hot cup of kai. The officer of the watch wrapped his hands around the mug to gather as much warmth from the mug into his body as possible. He asked Buckwheat, "Harris, this is marvellous, but how do you get this kai up the access tower without spilling any, and with the boat bobbing around like a rack of cork in the bath. Well, sir, when it gets to the bottom of the ladder, I put the sugar in my pocket because I knows you like it sweet. Yes, I do. Thank you, Harris. Then I put the spoon in the jacket pocket so I can stir the kai after putting in the sugar. Thank you, Harris. Yes, but how do you get it up here without spilling it, Harris? Like this, sir. Story 3. I got that right. This is a story that my father recounted to me, and I've seen 2 different types of this story. But the one that's identical to my father's was recounted by a sailor who joined with Harris. So I like to think that my father's is the pucker version. His story, this guy who joined with Harris, and the Singapore story, you will find on rnsubs.co.uk. Link in the description. rnsubs, Royal Navy Subs.co.uk. Good stories on there. Harris was going on leave, and on the last day on board, he was serving breakfast to the officers, and for whatever reason, they irked him a little bit more than usual. So when he'd cleared up the mess, he nailed a kipper to the underneath of the wardroom table, and then fucked off on leave. A week later, saw a telegram boy knocking on Harris's door. For a member of the dirty unwashed to get a telegram was unheard of unless you were getting married or you just inherited £43 million from your great uncle in Nigeria. The telegram boy handed over the telegram and said with a tone that showed his surprise was something that never happened in his profession, "It's a prepaid reply, Mr. Harris." This Mr. Harris, in his eyes, must be someone important. The telegram read like this. If you've enjoyed these stories of the Royal Navy and you have any dits yourself, stick them on an email, send them to me, and I will publish them. Then forevermore, your stories will be folklore on YouTube. Bernie out.